In times of fear and tyranny, an unlikely young woman changed the destiny of an entire nation. Hidden within the golden walls of a palace, a young Jewish woman became the key player in a plot of power, conspiracy, and salvation. Her name, Esther. Her mission, to save an entire people without anyone knowing who she truly was. When silence meant death, Esther chose to speak. Get ready to discover the hidden power of a queen. The story of Esther begins now.
In the grand city of Susa, where the brilliance of gold concealed shadows of intrigue and power, an event would change the course of history. In the vast royal hall, among marble columns and silk drapes, King Ahasuerus hosted a banquet like none before. Wine overflowed, music echoed, and the opulence of the Persian Empire was on full display. But while the king reveled in his glory, a single act would seal the fate of one queen and pave the way for another. The order was given. Bring Vashti before me. I want everyone to see her beauty. The hall fell silent. Servants rushed to fulfill the king's command, but the response came swiftly. And unexpectedly, Queen Vashti refused to obey. The king, humiliated before the nobles of the empire, was consumed by fury. If the queen behaves this way, what would stop the women of Persia from despising their husbands? Advisors were summoned, and the decision was made. Vashti would no longer be queen, but the empty throne needed a new queen. And the call spread throughout the land. From every province, young women were brought to the palace to compete for the crown. Among them, a young Jewish girl named Hadassah. Yet in the palace, no one knew her true origin. To everyone, she was simply Esther. Mordecai, her uncle and protector, had warned her, "Do not reveal who you are." And so, amidst the palace's luxury and corridors of intrigue, Esther stepped into a world where destiny awaited her. But was she ready for what was to come? The king's decree spread throughout the empire. In every province, messengers selected the most beautiful young women to be taken to the palace. Among them was Esther. She had never imagined that one day she would cross the king's gates. Her heart pounded. Everything around her was new, grand, and dangerous. There, among rare perfumes and silk dresses, each young woman prepared for a single moment. The night before King Xerxes, Haggai, the royal harem's overseer, watched each candidate closely. But something about Esther caught his attention. Her grace, her kindness, or perhaps something unseen. Quickly, she was given the finest perfumes, the finest garments. She earned a place of favor among the others. Meanwhile, Mordecai walked near the palace, watchful. No one there knew that Esther was Jewish, and he feared what might happen if they found out. Time passed. Each young woman had her turn before the king. Some left hopeful. Others were never seen again. Then, it was Esther's turn. She did not ask for riches, nor did she demand jewels or luxurious garments. She simply trusted. And when Xerxes saw her, something changed within him. The king no longer wished to look at any other. Esther was crowned queen of Persia. But this was not just a story of ascension. It was the beginning of something much greater. She didn't know it yet. But her place on the throne was no coincidence. Her people needed her. And soon, her courage would be tested. Not all great heroes wield swords. Sometimes their greatest weapon is courage. In the heart of the palace of Susa, where luxury and intrigue intertwined, a young queen carried a secret that, if revealed, could cost her life. And now, she stood before the most difficult decision of her life. An urgent message reached Esther, written by a desperate man. Mordecai was in anguish. The decree had already been signed. The end of the Jews was near. Esther, go to the king. Plead for our people. But how? No one could enter the king's presence without being summoned. The penalty for doing so, death. And Xerxes hadn't called for her in over a month. If she spoke, she might die. If she stayed silent, all her people, her brothers and sisters, would be exterminated. Another message from Mordecai arrived. Do not think that because you are in the palace, you will escape. If you remain silent now, deliverance will come from another place. But who knows? If it was not for such a time as this that you came to the throne. Esther closed her eyes. The fear was still there. But something greater began to grow within her. She took a deep breath. Gather all the Jews. Fast for me for 3 days. I too will fast. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I must die, then I will die. Esther had made her choice. But would the king hear her voice, or would that be her final decision? 3 days. 3 days of silence, of pleading, of fear and hope mixed in Esther's heart. The hours dragged on. Outside the palace, the Jews fasted and prayed. Inside, the young queen prepared for the most dangerous moment of her life. She dressed in her finest royal robes, adjusted the crown upon her head, but none of it could hide the truth. Her heart was racing. The king's decree was clear. Anyone who entered uninvited would die, unless the king extended his golden scepter. Esther took a deep breath. Her feet touched the cold floor of the corridor. Step by step, she moved toward the throne. The guards exchanged glances. Whispers echoed through the hall. No one dared to interrupt the king without being summoned. There was Xerxes, seated on his throne, surrounded by advisors and nobles. His eyes narrowed as he saw Esther crossing the great doors. Time seemed to stop. Would the king raise his scepter? Or would this be the last breath Esther took? The silence was crushing. Then, a movement. The king lifted his hand, and the golden scepter was extended toward her. Air filled Esther's lungs again. She stepped forward, touched the tip of the scepter, and bowed. The king tilted his head, intrigued. What is your request, Queen Esther? Ask me for anything. Up to half the kingdom and it shall be yours. Esther lifted her eyes. She couldn't act too quickly. A plan was beginning to take shape. If it pleases the king, may your majesty come today to a banquet I have prepared. For you and Haman. The king smiled. Beside him, Haman puffed out his chest with pride. H had no idea what was coming. Esther had taken the first step, but the game had only just begun. Destiny does not always reveal itself all at once. Sometimes, patience is needed to play with time. Esther knew that a single mistake could cost everything. King Ahasuerus had accepted her invitation. Haman would be there as well. But now, was it the right moment to speak? She understood that in the game of destiny, patience was her greatest ally. Night fell, and with it, the first banquet. The king looked at Esther and asked, "Tell me, my queen, what is your request? Even if it is half of my kingdom, I will grant it to you." A moment of suspense. The answer seemed imminent. But then, she took a deep breath. She smiled softly. "Your Majesty, if it pleases you, come again tomorrow to another banquet I have prepared. Then, I will make my request." The king nodded, intrigued. Haman smiled, suspecting nothing. Why wait another day? Esther knew something no one else did. But that night, King Ahasuerus could not rest. He ordered the royal chronicles to be brought to him. And there, among the forgotten words, a name appeared. Mordecai, the one who saved my life. Has he ever been rewarded? The servant hesitated. "No, your majesty. Nothing has been done for him. The king's eyes narrowed. Silence filled the room as something began to form in his mind. Meanwhile, Haman, confident in his power, arrived at the palace with a dark request: Mordecai's death. But as he entered, the king addressed him before he could speak. "Haman, what should be done for a man the king wishes to honor?" Haman's expression lit up. He smiled, certain that the king was speaking of him. "Your Majesty, this man should be dressed in royal robes, mounted on the king's horse, and proclaimed before all as one honored by the king himself." The king smiled, but then he gave an order that made Haman's blood run cold. "Excellent. Do this for Mordecai." Haman's face twisted in horror. The game had changed. Haman, who had come to request Mordecai's death, now had to honor him before the entire city. The people watched in astonishment as Haman, humiliated, led Mordecai through the streets of Susa. Esther observed from the palace, knowing that the first piece of the plan was in place. But one final step remained. Haman's downfall was near, and at the next banquet, the truth would come to light. The second banquet was ready. The torches burned, casting golden shadows across the walls of the hall. Servants arranged the final details on the table, while the aroma of the finest wines filled the air. King Xerxes was relaxed, satisfied. Haman beside him was still trying to hide the humiliation of the previous day. But Esther knew that tonight would change everything. Xerxes took a sip of wine and looked at his queen. "Now, Queen Esther, tell me your request. Ask me for anything, up to half the kingdom, and it shall be yours." Silence filled the hall. Esther lifted her eyes. Her voice was calm, but filled with emotion. "Your Majesty, if I have found favor in your eyes, and if it pleases the king, spare my life." The king frowned. "Spare your life?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Because I and my people have been sold to be destroyed. If we were only to be enslaved, I would remain silent, but they seek to exterminate us." Xerxes' expression changed. The entire hall held its breath. The king leaned forward, his eyes burning with fury. "Who dares to do this?" Esther turned her face without hesitation. "The adversary and enemy. Is this wicked Haman?" Haman's blood ran cold. The king rose abruptly, his face flushed with rage. The silence was deadly. Haman trembled. His throat was dry. "Your Majesty, But Xerxes did not want to hear. Furious, he stormed out into the garden, trying to contain his wrath. Haman fell at Esther's feet. He knew that his life was now in her hands. The king returned, and the scene before his eyes sealed Haman's fate. Haman was sprawled across Esther's couch, begging for his life. Xerxes clenched his fists. "He even dares to assault the queen in my own palace?" The guards moved without hesitation. Haman tried to speak, but it was already too late. One of the palace officials stepped forward. "Your Majesty, there is a gallows prepared at Haman's house. He built it for Mordecai." The king's eyes burned with decision. "Then let Haman perish upon it." And so, the man who plotted the destruction of a people met his ruin in his own trap. But there was still a problem. The king's decree was still in effect, and the day of the massacre was approaching. The danger was not over yet. The threat still loomed over the kingdom. Even with Haman dead, his cruel plan was still in motion. The royal decree, sealed with the king's ring, could not simply be revoked. The date of the Jews' destruction was approaching, and thousands of innocent lives were condemned to death. Esther knew she could not rest yet. Once again she stood before the king. This time, there was no banquet, no celebration, only a plea, and a decision that would change the fate of a people. She knelt before Xerxes, her face marked by anguish. If I have found favor in the king's eyes, please revoke Haman's letters. I cannot bear to see my people perish." The king looked at Esther. He had already lost one queen out of stubbornness. He would not lose another out of injustice. But the laws of Persia were unchangeable. "I cannot annul a decree sealed with my ring, but I can create a new one." Esther's eyes shone with hope. Mordecai was summoned to the palace. The royal ring, which once belonged to Haman, was given to him. "Write a new decree in the king's name," Xerxes commanded. And so, new letters were sent throughout the empire. The Jews now had the right to defend themselves. They could fight, they could resist. And when the day of the massacre arrived, it was not the Jews who perished. They rose, they fought, and they prevailed. The terror Haman had tried to spread fell upon those who had plotted evil. Peace was restored in the empire. The Jews not only survived, but thrived under the king's protection. Haman's name was erased from history, but Esther's, hers would be remembered forever. Mordecai became second in command in the kingdom, bringing justice and security to the people, ensuring they would never again be threatened. Esther remained by the king's side not just as his queen, but as a wise wife and a loyal counselor. Her courage not only saved lives but also won the heart of Xerxes. Although the Bible does not directly mention her children, many believe she had descendants, securing a royal lineage for generations to come. But more than that, her true legacy was greater than titles or inheritance. It was proof that a woman with courage and faith could change the course of history. And to this day, her name is celebrated during Purim, the festival that marks the day fear was defeated by hope. Esther entered the palace as an unknown girl, but she left history as an unforgettable queen.